take those tangible steps to see outside of ourselves. You don't have to save the world. You don't have to mentor a kid with counseling or whatever, but just taking the time to ask and really listen, I feel like goes a really long way these days.
Welcome to the Extraordinary Lives podcast, where we talk about lives that go beyond the ordinary to the extraordinary, with the extra being Jesus. We'll be encouraged with amazing stories and helpful insights from the lives of ordinary people who have that extra, that supernatural difference that only Jesus can give. I'm your host, Ellen Bennett. Thanks for joining us.
Hi everyone, welcome to the show. I am so happy to be here with Kristen Guy. I've known her for over 20 years through our church, Seacoast Community, and I've just long admired her for her friendliness. She instantly comes across to everyone as welcoming, inclusive, trustworthy, and just as an instant friend. So welcome, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Ellen. It's great to be here.
Great. Well, let's get started. You are a person who I think of as God working through and as you having some extraordinary stories, especially right now, you deciding to sail a boat in Asian waters with your family. So, Kristen, what are some fun things you're looking forward to on this big boat outing that you're about to embark upon?
Well, the first thing that just comes to mind immediately is that I get really excited to get certified to dive. I love snorkeling. My soul just rests, like the rhythm as I'm floating in the water and watching the whole world underwater move about and do its own thing. I have a blast doing that. So I'm excited to try diving too. I'm holding it loosely because I don't know how my ears will do or any of that kind of stuff,
Sure.
But that's my hope. And all four of us are planning to do that. So I'm excited to try that because we're just going to be in some beautiful places. The rest of my family is really excited to surf, and I am excited to watch them surf.
That's great. That's great. Sit on the beach with a book.
I know. I love paddling out into the water. I have never really taken to surfing, but I am excited to do that, and just the quiet time on the boat and being able to have our transportation be a dinghy. Just a different rhythm of life. I love other cultures too. I've already been having so much fun getting to know people in Malaysia and Thailand, and we went to Bali and got to know some people there, and just even discovering the sort of subtle differences between those countries that are so close to each other.
Yes.
And the different religions have just been fascinating to me. The way that Buddhism plays out in someone's daily life versus Islam versus Hinduism, and we've met such amazing people that practice each one of those. So it's been it's been eye-opening for me. And we've also actually met some really cool refugees from all over the world that have just rocked my perspective of how sorry I feel for myself when things are hard.
Yes.
And to just really make these friends that help me to see how joyful they can be just because they're together with their family and everything's kind of okay. It's been really helpful also.
Wow. Yeah. So already you've only been gone since, was it February?
4 months.
And already you've experienced this much. So
Yeah. So I look forward to discovering with my kids and my husband too. That part I just really am excited about.
That's great. And where all do you think you'll go?
Our dream for the immediate future is just Indonesia because it's so huge and so different from one island to the next, it seems like. And each of them offer different things. We're headed to the Mentawai Islands first, hopefully. And I think from what I can tell, there are a lot of Westerners or Australians and different non-island people there because it's a big surf spot. But as we sort of make our way down and into the more remote areas to experience that and just really get to relax into their culture and see. I mean, from what I've heard, they're all really receptive and friendly and kind. So
that's great.
Yeah, so that's what I look forward to a lot. And the sailing. The sailing's actually really fun.
Oh, good.
My heart is happy on the boat when it's moving. So
wow, that's great. Let's talk about your background. Where were you raised? Tell us a little bit about your family growing up.
Okay, I grew up in Texas, in South Texas. I grew up in Corpus Christi. I'm the oldest of 3 daughters. My mom and dad were married until they both passed away in the last few years. My whole family stayed in Texas. I moved to Colorado a few years after college. Ended up meeting my husband there, and we relocated to Encinitas a few years after that. But yeah, my childhood was awesome in a lot of ways and complicated in other ways. My parents loved each other fiercely sometimes, but both had some like hard stuff. My mom's mom kind of died out of the blue when I was 5, and it just was the start of several like pretty significant losses in our family. And so the result of that was that we often had a home of just sort of like survival sometimes, because things were just heavy. My poor mom, I think like her heart just hurt for a really long time after losing her mom, and then her dad and my other grandfather within a couple of years, and a really close friend of the family. There just was a lot. So my family was really sweet and loving, but also really hurting in a lot of ways too. We were really involved in our church there. It was a traditional Presbyterian church that my family had been in for a couple of generations, and that was just a huge, great support through my childhood and for our family. So that was really where I sort of first was hearing the truth about who God is and who Jesus is. And my mom had a just sweet connection with Jesus and would talk with me about him early. She always talked about how I had kind of this like early longing for a God connection that I would ask about, around 4 and 5. So I had a sweet sort of understanding of God and Jesus from an early age.
That's great. What were some turning points in your relationship with Jesus?
When I was 12 years old, I went to a Christian sports camp for the summer, just a week-long camp. And by then, I was like a high-achieving kid and was in a kind of competitive elementary school and was performing pretty well. And that was the tool I used to, get my parents' approval, or that was the way I thought I could get that from them. But that created sort of a loneliness for a little kid where I was trying to sort of carry my own life and trying not to burden them with any of the struggles that I had, and trying to kind of stay out of the way and make sure that I didn't upset things at home. So by the time I went to this little camp in the small town outside of in Texas, I heard the gospel again in a really clear way one night, and kind of had the typical, I literally was staring at the stars and just was saying like, Jesus, yeah, you're who I've been longing for. Like, that's the piece that I don't really have for myself that I want. And so that was like a tangible start for me of trying to really follow Jesus and understand more of who he was.
That's great. So it sounds like you were a very responsible oldest child.
Yeah.
And really had that heart already then for others, and also looking out for them versus yourself in a way too. So tell me a little bit more, what happened after that to further cement your relationship with Jesus?
Yeah, that's a great question. I am a super typical Enneagram 2. So yes. I just have sort of a natural desire to understand people and to anticipate their needs. So that was something that just sort of came naturally for me, which made making friends pretty easy in junior high, because all junior high kids are needy. If somebody else can see their needs, they respond quickly. So I did pretty quickly figure out that friends and relationships were a huge driver for me. I waffled a lot in my walk with Christ. Coming home from camp that year, there was no youth group really to plug into. I was trying to figure out how to walk with Christ on my own. I started making some really stupid decisions, just getting into a little bit of partying late in kind of early high school. And there was a woman on campus that was involved with Young Life at my high school. And she just started inviting me out for lunch from school sometimes and really took an interest in me. And she was not by any means like a Pied Piper kind of adult. She actually had a young baby, but her just seeing me really made a huge difference in my life. And so I got really involved with Young Life through high school, and high school was a rocky time, but a really sweet time, because it was the years that I was really falling in love with Jesus. I worked at a camp for a summer for 1 month. That was a huge pivotal change for me. It was my first taste of serving God with other people in a way that felt like a taste of heaven to me.
And was that a Young Life camp?
It was.
Okay.
It was. I got to go work in upstate New York for a month.
Wow.
As a server, like a food server, and just the really hard work over that month and being so closely connected to a team that was praying for hundreds of kids coming in to camp each week that were hearing the gospel a lot for the first time, really opened my heart to a huge desire to see others know the sweetness and the love of Jesus.
That's great. And then you ended up meeting your husband and serving with Young Life later. Is that right?
I did. I was actually serving with Young Life on my own. Brent and I met when I was 27, and I had gone on staff with Young Life about a year out of college. So I had been working for them for several years in Texas and then Colorado. And then he jumped in to some degree in a volunteer capacity once we met. But yeah, that was what I was doing. That kind of became my life's work, my passion soon after college.
That's great. And it seems like you're still really involved with that passion with Seacoast high school students. So that's been neat to see. You had a group last summer, a Bible study, and where the students could just talk about different questions they might have about Christianity. So tell me some about your experience with Young Life. Do any God stories stick out? Any ways that God worked that you just knew was Him, that just seemed extraordinary?
Yeah, there are a lot. Young Life does a really amazing job of communicating the personality and character of God and Jesus. We all have our sort of default perspective of who God is. There was a message at Seacoast a few days ago that the visiting speaker was talking about how when you're at your darkest point, like when things are the very worst, what you believe at your core about who God is what just spills out. And I have to say that what spills out for me, even in all of my neuroses or my wacky how I'm dealing with life and unhealthy ways and whatever, what spills out for me is that Jesus, God, through Jesus, is just deeply loving and gracious and accepting of me and pleased with me purely because He made me. When I'm honest, that's like the core of my understanding of Him. And I do credit the way that we were taught to study scripture and share the gospel, share Jesus in the scriptures, really just opened wide for me the depth of how loving God is that's so far beyond what I can comprehend and understand. So doing that with Young Life, to have been presenting the gospel for so many years verbally to a group of students, I had to really come to grips in my own heart and soul with that deeply loving, gracious part of God. And it has really impacted the way that I've moved into adulthood and into my life in a lot of ways. It doesn't always come out, and I'll say it's probably I don't know that my kids would say that that's what comes out necessarily, but that is what fuels me when I think about other people knowing God. Is I do believe that most humans are longing for that and want to be truly and deeply seen and loved and known. And so I get pretty excited about wanting to share that aspect with people.
That's great. And you mentioned your kids.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about them. They are just wonderful. I've loved getting to spend time with them these past few weeks and very impressed with them. And I can so relate to, you want to raise your children in this environment where they'll know Jesus and understand who He is, and you want to be a good example of that. And then, especially in a family situation, you're always failing. At least I was always failing and am still always failing. But the beautiful thing that I love about Christianity that I've learned from raising kids is that it's more important about being real and authentic. And when I do mess up, to go back and just acknowledge, hey, I really messed up here, and please forgive me. And I think that really helps build that relationship, because they, of course, would know that I've messed up. And to have that apology, I also hope, is a good example for them in the future to know this is how we handle our relationships. We own up to what we've done, we ask forgiveness, and then, of course, there's the trying really hard not to do it again, which often we still will fail at. But I think when we have that heart to really live out a God-honoring life, then hopefully our kids pick that up. That's our hope and our prayer.
Yeah, definitely. I am really banking on the apologies making a big difference.
Yes.
Because, that's sort of all we have. Brent and I have tried so hard just to parent well, and we mess up all the time, and are so aware of it. It's funny, I'd say the hardest part about apologizing sometimes is knowing that I need to, but also seeing where I feel like I'm really right in the situation.
Yes.
And don't want to. Like, to apologize for the part that I am really not being loving in, even when there's been a real infraction or whatever it is.
Yes.
But I've learned, if I can just do that, if I can find something to apologize for, that it usually at least sort of softens both our hearts enough to move forward. And it's interesting to see how differently my kids react to apologies. So Henry's pretty quick. He's like a peacemaker. So he's really happy for the peace, can accept it pretty quickly, and he can embrace it quickly. And with Kate, it's been really helpful for she and I to just recognize, we can say it, put it out on the table, and then step away for a bit and let ourselves both kind of calm down a little bit. And it really helps. It feels like God will then usually bring some softness for both of us to be able to see each other in a more loving light, I guess.
That's great. That's good advice, too. I remember as a parent having to give myself timeouts.
Yeah, it's true.
I have to say, okay, I can feel myself getting angry. I'm going to go to my room for a little bit.
Yeah.
And so often I would get in the way of the lesson because there would be an infraction done. Then I would get upset. And instead of being able to really talk about the infraction to help walk them through why that wasn't a good idea, I would have to apologize, which that takes the main stage.
Totally. Yeah.
So parenting is the hardest job you'll ever do, right?
It is.
But it's also the most amazing and wonderful. We wouldn't trade it for anything.
No, it's funny. I heard the difference between sweet and spicy families. And she just said, you look out there and there are these sweet families where the kids are just like, yes, ma'am, thank you, mommy. And then you've got your spicy families. And it was freeing to read and think, you know what, we just are. We're just a spicy family. It's not a terrible thing. It just is what it is. But we are. So we've had a lot of just practicing and working through conflict and differences of how we do things and how we see things. And
that's great. And I have a feeling most families are probably spicy on the inside of the home versus outside.
Yeah, probably so. Unfortunately, mine can be inside and outside sometimes.
Love it. They're just being authentic.
That's true. It's it's funny.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit more about them and being a mom. What have you learned, too, in being a mom to these two kids and also in being a wife to your husband, Brent?
I am in the middle of learning and have been learning for our whole marriage and then the whole time that we've had kids, just how to really understand and work with people that are created to be and think really differently than I am. I can get pretty stuck in thinking that my way of seeing the world or my way of thinking is best. So even if it's not a right and a wrong, that little bit of pride can sneak in for me easily sometimes. So for example, with my daughter, so I'm an Enneagram 2, she's a strong 8, and I did not understand her when she was a little girl. It came across to me as sometimes abrasive and harsh and maybe sort of controlling with even other kids. And I had such this overreaction of trying to be almost too much people pleaser-ish kind of stuff that I just would come down on her really hard because I was trying to squelch that in her without really understanding it. And I've grown to understand how beautiful and precious she is. I mean, God has made her to be this human that will end up setting the world on fire. And I'm watching her really surrender to God in her life and watching him start to use that. And it's beautiful. And I wish that I hadn't stifled her like I did, but I have thankfully grown and sort of learned. My husband always would remind me, let's go with the grain. And that's just not easy for me. I get kind of in my head sometimes just worrying about what other people think and perceive. So that's probably the biggest thing. And Brent and I are really different personalities also. So learning to work together when we see things really differently is probably the biggest challenge. But it opens my eyes to how God makes people in the world. And it's definitely good for me. It's just hard apart sometimes.
Yes, that's
sure.
great.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's so many similarities in us and our families because, of course, my Haley has always been very strong-willed. And we used to say, this is such a great trait, but we just need to help her channel it the right way.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Yes, so that's a very good point. How about your new adventure that you're going on? I'm sure all of this is reflected in that as well. Your decision to be sailing a boat in Asian waters with your family. Tell us a little bit about how you came to that decision, what you'll be doing, about your boat.
Yeah.
Etc.
Well, Brent's been dreaming for a few years of doing something like this and has been talking about it for a while. But for several years, we were the primary caregivers for my parents. And so it wasn't really an option for us to go do it. So it was easy to dream with him. It was low risk. We could watch all these YouTube channels and dream about what our boat would be like. But there wasn't a whole lot of risk. But my mom had passed away a few years ago, and then my dad passed away at the end of 2020. So a few weeks later, a friend of ours called and had basically like the perfect boat in the slip next to him in Malaysia. And Brent is a great researcher. He had been doing a lot of research. He knew the safest boat, the best performing, the most comfortable to live on, kind of that combination of all of those things. And so when our friend called and we started talking about it, and it was this great deal because it was COVID and nobody could get into Malaysia. So I jokingly say that Brent caught me at a weak moment because I was still really processing losing my dad, and then we had COVID. I mean, it just was a crazy time, but I do feel like God just really warmed us all up to the idea, and it felt like the right timing and a really fun thing to do as a family. So we, long story short, slowly bought this boat and finally went over to take possession in 2022, just a few months ago. And we've been over there in the works, like just getting the boat sort of up to speed, and it's hauled out of the water right now, getting some extra solar put on and the electrical system all up to speed. And it's a great, super comfortable catamaran with 3 cabins in it, and it's a sailboat, so we've been learning to sail the last couple of years. And so we've moved the boat to Thailand for now, and our next plan is to get over to Sumatra in Indonesia. So hopefully in the next few months we'll be doing that. And the dream for both of us, it did feel like it was our dream, but that we kept laying at God's feet and just checking in and felt like he was blessing it and sort of saying like, if this is what you guys want to do, I will honor this. And our dream has just been to sort of reconnect with our kids too. Just reset some things, like just reset some dynamics of just bad patterns that we've gotten in over the years, mostly out of Brent's and my emotional health. I don't know, like places where we lack emotional health and have created some dynamics that weren't exactly the loving way that we would have wanted to parent. So it's already feeling like it's doing some of that. So it's been good, but it's been probably the hardest thing I've ever done in my life too.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love how you said just resetting. That's amazing. I just want to commend you both for even noticing that there were some patterns that you wanted to reset, because I think part of being healthy is being able to sense when something is unhealthy.
Yeah.
So it's a little tricky.
Yeah.
And we're all unhealthy.
Yeah.
I have a sweet friend who always says, we raise our kids and then we just have to tell them we'll pay for their therapy later because they're going to need it.
Yeah. It's funny, in Kate's journal and her little kid journal, I kept a really sporadic little journal for both of them when they were little. And I wrote a letter to her therapist when she was 4. And I opened it just with, this is just to save you both a lot of time and save you some money, Kate. But these are the things you're going to need to know. And obviously she was not in therapy yet at the time. So she'll use it at some point, I'm sure.
That's right.
But I agree. For
So
sure.
you said this was one of the hardest things you've done.
Yeah.
What has been especially hard about it?
Well, I just was processing this a little bit with my Bible study this morning. It was really helpful to finally sort of put a finger on it. I have struggled my whole life on and off with some depression, and it's been some dark times and then maybe a long time time with no bouts or no struggles with it. So my relationship with my mom was kind of complicated even when she was healthy, and then she had Alzheimer's for a long time before she passed away, and there still is some grief that I think I just have not felt or gone through. And then my dad was around for a few more years. We had an easier relationship. It was kind of easier to process his loss, and I don't know that it's really all about my mom. Some of it is that I just stuff emotion, like different little traumas through life and different hurts or whatever they are. I'm kind of a stuffer, and I have learned to, I'll say I've grown in that, but it's still kind of my default. So frankly, it has just stirred up some of that old stuff. I haven't gone into like a deep dive with depression, but it feels like there's been sort of this kind of like baseline of depression that I've kind of settled back into a little bit since I've had my coping tools, I will say, stripped away. And I'm the one that chose it. Like, yes. I gave them up, but I am really dependent when I'm at home on being able to walk with a friend and just process and just go through what I'm feeling. And that is really sort of how I tend to keep from, I don't know, just to sort of let it flow. And I haven't had that as much, and I have not really known how to just be with myself and the Lord and work it through, and finding some balance and how to do that with my family too. So that's really it. We got stuck in a city in Malaysia for much longer than we had planned on. So we were living in a high-rise apartment, and that's just not my dream life. I'm just not a big city girl. We weren't really able to be in the water. We weren't able to sail much at all. And so the situation was harder. It's a developing country. Things just don't work well there. My credit card wasn't working well. Your phone's not working well. Opposite time zone of home, and my son was struggling some too with missing surfing and missing his friends. So it's just been kind of lonely.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Yeah, but it's teaching me how to get more of my like emotional needs met with my family, and also how to sort of meet theirs a little better, like not needing to go outside of our family so much. So
got it.
That's been kind of the crux of the really hard part. And I think I've got a little bit of latent pain kind of stuck in there that needs to just be able to get out, which has been really nice to see friends and be with people. But
that's good. I'm so glad you've been able to come back this month.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm definitely not at the top of my game while I'm here, but it's freeing and kind of healing too. So
that's good.
Yeah.
It's amazing how we all have these coping mechanisms for protecting ourselves.
Yeah.
And some more than others, especially against that pain that we have in our lives or losses we've experienced.
Yeah. My undergrad degree was in psychology, and I gravitated toward that because it was so fascinating to me, that combination of nature and nurture. It's fascinating to me how complex we all are just in our DNA, and then you add the surroundings on top of it and how people are sort of trained in that, and it's fascinating to me. Good stuff.
My daughter-in-law Elizabeth recommended a book called Recovering from Losses in Life, and one of the things I was amazed at that it said is that with each and every loss comes a potential for change, growth, new insights, understanding, and refinement, all positive descriptions and words of hope. And he talks about how loss is the only thing that can really make us grow. But at the same time, this is another quote, losing hurts. It carries sharpened points that jab into our nerves and cause pain. We want to be in control of our lives, so we build walls around us with signs that say, losses, no trespassing. And his idea and study that he's looked at is that when we go through a loss, we really need to take time to grieve it. And he thinks a lot of the reasons why we still feel that pain can be that we're not allowing ourselves to really experience that loss and process it, which is just human nature. Yeah. I mean, who wants to be sad and down and think about hard things? But, we are very complex people.
We are. Mm-hmm. We are. I said that it was actually helpful to have both of my kids kind of young as we were going through losing my parents, because they were in a facility for a while, and you're facing death every day when you're going into the facility. It was an amazing place, very loving people, but people are at the end of their lives. And I said, if I had not come home to kids who were living these vibrant lives and moving forward into more life, it would have really been a much heavier burden to carry. So it was almost a gift in a way to have the kids around to balance that, but I think it did sort of keep me also from going through the like darker, harder parts of some of it too.
Yes.
I do have if I can have a couple more minutes, I have a brief story I thought of from my work in Young Life that has really blessed me over the years. So one of my favorite memories of my involvement with Young Life when I was living in Colorado was with a girl, and she was at the time the high school girl that I was probably the closest to. We had walked through some really hard stuff in her life, and I had seen her have to go into treatment for a little bit and then come back. And because I was single, one of my favorite tools when I was working with Young Life was just having my apartment open, and girls would come over and just hang out. Sometimes all evening, sometimes they would spend the night, but she had this habit of just coming over and sitting on my couch, and we would just watch movies and make food that was bad for us. It was a really fun time because I just had these limitless hours to be with girls, and I saw an amazing amount of fruit through that because there just was such a chance to love them in the way that God loves them, that they would eventually feel it one way or another, even if there weren't a lot of words to describe what that relationship was like. And there was one experience when she was in a particularly hard place. We were living in Colorado and gone up to the mountains for this short retreat for the weekend, and we were in the middle of a session with somebody talking, and she started just getting really sad and heavy. And so I walked out with her, and it was freezing cold outside and it was dark, so we were trying to just find this little space where we could get a little bit of privacy, and the best place we could find was the little entryway in front of the bathroom doors. And so we're in this tiny space of like 4x4 entryway with doors on each side, but it was closed up, and there was one door to the outside, but it was closed up pretty tight. And she's just sobbing, and I just had my arms around her and was holding her and just listening and praying a little bit. And then there was this moment where she was saying, I'm just not worth it. I'm not worth it. And I don't even remember why I thought to say, it wasn't a conscious decision, but I just said, you're worth it to me. You're worth it to me. And I didn't even feel like I was really even saying it. And she said she looked down at that moment in my hands, and they're not like the most dainty hands in the world, but she said, I looked down and your hands were definitely a man's hands, and your voice sounded like a man's voice. And I knew Jesus was telling me in that moment, you're worth it to me. You're worth it to me. So she explained this afterwards, but literally, like, as I was saying those words, the craziest wind was like blowing up under the little outdoor door that was right there. And it was like, it was the Holy Spirit. There was no way it was anything else. She was in an extreme dark place, and I feel like God sort of showed up in an extreme light way for her. Like, just, she needed something big and tangible. And I wouldn't say that, like, from that moment her life was roses, but it made a huge difference. Like, it started to change the way she saw herself. She saw value because she knew definitively that Jesus saw her with value. And that little moment was for her, but it was for me too. It's just always like my heart just fills up as I think about it again. And even just in my 49-year-old life of thinking of all the ways I feel like I'm not worth it, or I don't know, just realizing like every little part of me is worth it to him. Every little thought that I have during the day, every little struggle that I go through, feeling like I'm not doing a good job with my kids or in my marriage or whatever it is. It's just that he's saying, you're worth it to me. Like, you're worth all the trouble in the world. And that sort of speaks to me to who God is at his core.
Wow. That's great. And that's really a great story, I think, to even end on, because I was wondering, how do you deal with depression and hard things and losses? And you've been saying that throughout, that it's knowing that Jesus loves you, cares about you, and that that's true.
Yeah.
And it's also wonderful to hear of an experience where Jesus actually was so tangible.
Yeah.
For him to show up like that.
Yeah.
And to be so real just because this person really needs that is amazing.
Yeah.
So that's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to share? Are there any ideas that you have that you would want to make sure people know about Jesus or Christianity?
The idea of get filled up, like getting filled up as much as you can with how much Jesus loves you, loves me. And then not being afraid, like not waiting for it to all come together perfectly to reach out to someone else that might need to feel that too. Like my wheelhouse is thinking of little ways to care for people. Everyone's got different ways of doing that. But as I look around, like the reason that I love working with high school kids too is that, well, one, someone did it for me and it made a huge difference. And it was a really joyful, fun experience. So it's not an obligation thing, but I just can't help but see when I walk into church on Sundays, different high school kids, and like knowing that there's a lot more going on below the surface, even when things look great and they're holding it together, and that just having another adult beside your parents notice you and really seem to care how your day's going makes a huge, huge difference. And I would say it's the same with my favorite checkers at Trader Joe's, and it's the same with my kids and my husband, and unfortunately I do the worst job with the people living in my home.
I think we all do.
We do.
Amen.
Because they're safe and awesome.
Right.
But really just to take the time, and frankly, like that has been a real blessing for me in my own emotional struggles. If I'm having a hard time, the moment that I see outside myself, things are just almost immediately lighter. And I think that's just to continue to really take those tangible steps to see outside of ourselves. You don't have to save the world. You don't have to mentor a kid with counseling or whatever, but just taking the time to ask and really listen, I feel like it goes a really long way these days.
That's really good. And one last question, I think it'll be the last, we'll see. But how does someone go about getting filled up? What do you mean by that?
Oh my gosh.
What are some helpful hints or things that you do?
Yeah, I mean, anytime I can be in God's Word is good, even if it doesn't land. Like sometimes it's really dry and what I'm reading does not connect me in a feeling way to God, but it almost always changes my perspective for the day, even if it's not some huge emotionally connective moment. I am not the most consistent Bible study quiet time person, and I struggle with that a lot. I do still really value it, so I always try to keep that as sort of my start to the day, but I also love sleep, and sometimes it just doesn't.
Yes,
I don't get up in time. So it comes in different ways for me, different times. Honestly, a lot of the time it can even just be in a quiet moment, whispering Jesus' name as I breathe out and breathe in. Like that is no substitute for me having a good chunk of time with the Lord where I'm just listening. But sometimes that's a really easy little reset of just reminding my soul that I am not, what I'm seeing in front of me is not what I'm about, and the world is not what I was made for. That's a good reminder. But hands down, being in the Bible and journaling and just being quiet and still. A lot of times I'm not a great discipline structure person, so just being quote unquote enrolled in a Bible study helps me a lot because it keeps me reading each day. So I've been super thankful for my little group of 6 women that I've been with for the last several years. We just keep doing something. It may not be the best study in the world, but keep doing something.
And then you also have the encouragement of hearing other people's perspectives and what they're going through and how they're handling it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how God's helping them through it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that.
Yeah.
And one thing I've noticed with reading the Bible each day, or just even thinking about something I've memorized, sometimes I'll just simply say the Lord's Prayer as I'm driving.
Yeah.
Or the 23rd Psalm,
Yeah.
ones that a lot of us have memorized. And it is just a resetting of my mind. I love how you called it a new perspective, because we get so inundated with our own thoughts, our own self-focused perspective. So we don't even often realize we're self-focused.
Right.
And to see more from God's point of view, it's actually very freeing, I think, as well.
Yeah,
So.
absolutely. Yeah.
Well, good. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
I so appreciate it.
Yeah, it's fun to just talk about life.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us. This is Ellen Bennett with the Extraordinary Lives podcast.